Thank you so much, May White. Well, I think the concept of outside in and inside out is very amazing because a lot of times when we talk about change on the outside, but we forget what's on the surface is actually an expression of what comes within. So a lot of you know me by my communications career. I do quite a bit of coaching, training, workshops or facilitation for different organizations in the area of communication. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes to share with you on what I feel is imminent in these times of change when we talk about brand communication. For a second, I would imagine this. Imagine that you're in the house, sitting on your sofa with your family, watching late night news, playing with your dogs, enjoying family time. And then you went into the kitchen. In the kitchen, you saw that the stove was on fire. You're the only one there, and you realize very soon that that is beyond salvaging. The only way or the only thing to do right then and there is to get your family out of the house to safety. So you run back out into the living room after being in the kitchen, seeing that the stove is on fire, and then you run out to the living room. And how would you communicate with your family? You have two options. Option A is that you would run out into the living room and say, "Hey, run, it's on fire. Let's go, let's go." Or B, you would go into the living room and say, hi family, we have a situation here. I think it requires our attention because there is an incident in the premises, and it would be ideal for us to look into the matter with immediate urgency because we might need to pack and evacuate the house. Well, I certainly hope for those of you who are watching, you would choose A, that says quickly, run, there's a fire, with a lot of emotion, instead of using option B, which is, telling them slowly with a lot of words that aren't really necessary during that time. This is an example that I would say very much symbolizes sometimes when you're in a crisis or when a brand is responding to this. First things that we look for is whether or not these brands are able to communicate timeliness, because in this very challenging times, you would look for clarity in communication and you would look for timeliness. Clarity meaning in this age that, people have multiple screens, the time that is given to your brand voice would be very limited. So if you are able to shorten or to make your message clear, that is brief as well as to the point to your consumers and to your internal brand owners, you stand a much higher chance for people to listen to you and to understand you. So sometimes we say during a change setting, over communication is important. Clarity of communication is important. And from time to time, try your best to do some check-ins and to make sure whether what's being communicated is as intended, and try to get the feedback that you might in order to confirm the message, whether it has gone through. And in order for information or communication to be effective, do rehearse for impact. So my first point of advice for brands that are communicating during change is the point of clarity. The second point is the point of timeliness. Like in the fire example, we talked about when you see a fire, the first thing is to communicate clearly and quickly with a timely manner. Likewise, in the current days, in fact, gone are the days that we can spend weeks working through different departments in order to draft up a press release for a matter that needs to be addressed. We are actually looking at a much shorter time window, and our customers and our consumers are looking for us to be able to respond very timely to situations that arises. So aside from clarity, timeliness is another important factor that we need to be quite careful of. It also adds another layer when we talk about timeliness, that is whether or not we're able to look ahead of time. So imagine if you're a brand and you're looking at a certain issue, if you're able to predict with a certain level of certainty what would be happening next, and you're able to communicate ahead of time, that would set you apart from your competitors. So I would like to give you an example of one of the biggest hit movies in our times is the Titanic, right? And when the Titanic set sail and when it came across a major disaster in the year 1912, the factor of timeliness is also is in fact one of the things that we see lacking, because as the crew on deck saw the iceberg coming, he delayed in flagging to the crew and to the rest of the crew and to the people that in fact there is an iceberg. So imagine if that person on the lookout did catch up on the timeliness of communicating the message, or if he wasn't distracted in the movie, if he wasn't distracted by the kiss of Jack and Rose on the deck, was a factor that they did capture, maybe the disaster could have been avoided. So another factor that links to the point is authenticity. In current days, when we talk about change and when we talk about communication, more and more consumers, internal customers, external customers, or even our competitors are looking at a more humane and true communication channel and message. So meaning we expect to listen and hear the real thing instead of hearing what's been camouflaged. Because right now in this age, when we look for communication messages, it's no longer we're waiting to be fed by news, but rather we are being able to actively look for information of a brand. So imagine if a brand communicates authentically, then whatever we hear on all fronts, from a consumer perspective, from a staff perspective, or from a brand fan perspective, we'll be hearing the same story. But if you're not authentic, it would mean that we'll be hearing mixed messages from different types of channels, and that would be a brand that doesn't come across authentic, and people don't like that. So authenticity is important, and I think it also is a challenge to a lot of brand owners that we need to be bold to not have all the answers and to be honest with what we communicate. So with the 3 points of clarity, timeliness, as well as authenticity being important outside, utilizing May White's model, the outside communication channel, I would like to end by offering an inside tip, which is, are we able to learn how to communicate failure? Because imagine that we're in a change mode if you are looking at a brand change or an environmental change. If we're in a change mode, it would mean that we are experimenting, we're trying different things. So it's like when I was a college student, I studied physics, I studied chemistry. I go into the lab and I do lab tests, right? So in the lab, one of the things that I'm expected is to have failures. And it's totally okay to write my lab report saying I did not succeed in this experiment because there was this point that I missed, or there was this little measurement that I didn't take. So we're okay with failing. But then in a business context, especially when we're during change, if a brand or if an organization is not ready to develop a culture of failure communication, at least internally, it would mean that, whatever change that's going on is really something that, we were not trying to really address. Because imagine the brands that we love or the brands that we use, very common brands say WD-40. It's a lubricant brand, and the name WD-40 actually means it's the 40th formula. So meaning they have failed 39 times. And for a brand to be able to put that 40 onto their brand name, I think is pretty amazing, because it would mean that the culture of the brand would allow failure. And like what Albert Einstein has said, if we solve the same problem with the same solution, that would be equivalent. So whether or not we're able to solve the same problem with a different solution, that means change. And with change, there has to be failure. So my advice for brand owners would be, could you have a brand communication internally that would be able to allow failure communication? So that's my 4 points of tips for you